This is where it's important not to confuse or mix up negation or non-duality and the psychotherapeutic process as taking negation and non-duality as some psychotherapeutic process. Yeah, in my experience, when in negation, you're simply meeting the contents of experience, what arises in experience with I'm not that. And you're stepping back and back and back, and you're taking that back. Yeah. It's not an analysis of the contents of experience. It's not a trying to alter or fix the mind, the brain, the head, the thoughts, the emotions, sensations. It's not a manipulation or an analysis of those. It's simply meeting what's arising with I'm not that. You see, if it's met with an analysis, as if you were to do a psychotherapeutic process or analysis on that mental process, in a way, that is the problem with as far as non-duality and negation comes, because there's a rising of experience, and then there's the one who's sensing, they're seeing that experience. Yeah, that's really what we're bound to. It's not the contents that comes up, it's being the owner of the contents. And when we go to analyze that contents, we're analyzing it as the owner of it. You see? The other thing about it is that it's like a mental which is always changing because it's under causes and conditions, is trying to analyze mental. So it's not actually seeing what's arising, it's interpreting what's arising. And that interpretation kind of spins around itself. So you see one pattern, you kind of analyze it and feel that it's resolved or something, and then another one comes, and then another one comes, and comes. It's like an endless arising, let's say, met with interpretation. In negation, non-duality is not that movement. Negation, non-duality is seeing what's arising and then seeing that it's not you. Yeah. So what arises and what's seeing that arising are both met with not you. That's what who am I does. There's an arising, there's a seeing of it. This asks this, both of what you're not, what it is, and the thing gets negated. There's no analysis, there's no affirmation, there's no follow-up to it. You see, you sit in what remains. In my experience now, that if that's done properly, silent illumination from Chan Buddhism is really nice for this too, and direct contemplation. Those kind of go together if we're talking about methods, yeah? Advaita or non-duality is not a method, it's a message of direct, you're already that. Yeah, if you do anything, it's to meet it with that negation, right? But if we were to look at methods now, there's a processing that happens when you don't touch the contents of experience. So if negation is done properly, yeah, then what arises is met with I'm not that, and it's not longer further analyzed or manipulated. Do you see? The head is not going to manipulate what's coming up. It's not going to try to stop it or change it. And in that way, when the contents of experience moves through the space of what you are, there's a real intimacy with what that content is. And I feel like that processes a lot. From where I'm sitting, I've had a lot of relief from letting things arise through that space without manipulating it and changing it. Because as soon as I get involved, I fuck it up because it gets interpreted. Yeah, and then that interpretation gets interpreted and the wheels are spinning now. This is the thing when people try to use non-duality as a self-help program or something. It's the same thing happens in 12 steps, you know? People try to take that and they use it as this self-help thing. Like I'm going to take self and I'm going to form it into a pristine, perfect self. And that's not what it's doing. Step 4 and 5, you see the resentment to who it's to, how it affected you and your part to play so that you can expose self. So that you can see how self has arisen from your past, yeah, and how it's acted to make your life uncomfortable and mislead your life. This is why self-reliance has failed us, because we've been putting our reliance in this system of self. The process is not to make self into some pristine self. It's to see how it's influenced and how it's led you to drinking, drugging, gambling, sex, whatever, yeah, and to lose faith in that system, to put that faith into a higher system, a higher non-system, a higher power. It's a removal of faith, you see? It's not some way to make self into some pristine, beautiful self. It's a removing of belief, yeah, or a moving of belief over to another higher power, we would say in that program. Okay, so if you're using non-duality as a psychotherapeutic process, you're still stuck in duality. And that will go on and on until negation is used properly, yeah, or seated method or whatever the hell you're doing. Yeah, if you were to look more at the psychotherapeutic side, it would be looking at the contents of experience and really examining those contents of experience. Yeah, that is not, in my experience, what non-duality is. And it's a pitfall or something that people get stuck in with negation. Because they go to negation and then something comes up which is a sensitive subject. And then the head gets drawn into that sensitive subject. Yeah, it gets, ooh, this one's super true. Or, I really need to look at that, you see? And now you're bound as the seer of what's come up and the analyzer of what's come up, which is the same bondage as being in the initial thought in the first place. So that's not what Advaita is doing, or non-duality. It's a very direct resting in what you are through that process. If some people might really benefit from the psychotherapy, psychology, go that route, but it's a different thing, and that's the importance that needs to be seen. That's the examining of the individuality. Whether your opinions on it are good or bad, whatever, you're looking at the contents of experience, how they developed, and how they're showing face now. Yeah? And then maybe, I don't know, trying to change that or whatever psychotherapeutic thing you're doing. Yeah? Non-duality is seeing that contents of experiencing and negating it. I think the argument from the psychological side is that the contents will keep arising until it's processed, which makes sense. I feel that if you're doing negation properly and you're sitting into what you are, you're not stopping or manipulating what's arising. So the contents that are arising, mentally, emotionally, sensually, physiologically, whatever's arising is coming through quite clear, meaning you're not manipulating it or interpreting it or trying to change it from what you are. The head might be trying to, but you're also negating that, you see? And when it comes up really clean like that, you see the whole thing, and then it can process. It's like in Chan, they say the body will heal itself if you leave it alone, you know? So it's that really leaving the whole fucking thing alone. Is that non-duality, and then you see it for what it is, rather than the interpretation of the head interpreting the head. You see? It's an important thing to talk about, because your head is going to do that. There's going to be a rising in experience. Your head is going to switch to being the seer. It's going to claim that you're the seer, and that needs to be negated in non-duality. That is not to be played with in this arena. As soon as you play with it, you're interpreting it and you're manipulating it into something that it's not. Do you see? That's how trauma becomes my trauma. Thought becomes my thought. Sensation becomes my sensation. Emotion, my emotion. Feeling, my feeling. As soon as that my is put in front of it, it's been interpreted now, and now it's murky. Yeah? And there's a want to change it because you feel you own it. Negation is not moving that route. Negation is looking at the non-ownership or the non-doership of what's arising, and then that shit can arise real pure. Yeah. So there might be a bunch of sadness that comes up, a bunch of memory, a bunch of sensation. Yeah, because it's not being bypassed by the mind. Yeah. That's like super important. Because then negation becomes a very fluid movement, and it becomes a fluid relationship. Embodiment done well, or let's say properly. And if you're interested in that, I would suggest reading Judith Blackstone's stuff. That's the best stuff I've seen, and studying with her was amazing. But embodiment done properly is not a mental movement. You're not thinking your way into embodiment. And it's the same in Chan, silent illumination. Sitting, or shikantaza, sitting and being aware of the totality of the internal space of the body all at once. You can't do that from a thinking. Your thinking is going to fragment what's going on. Yeah? So if you become aware of the whole internal space of the body, then eventually that space becomes pervaded by space. Internal and external space are the same space, but you're not coming outside of yourself. Yeah, because the whole thing is pervaded by what you are already. And then whatever moves through that space can process. It can, in a way, present itself. Yeah. But if it's being led by the mind, if what's arising in your experiences is being interpreted by the psychological, you often end up outside of your body, living in front of yourself. You go back to all the patterns that are held, yeah, which is the same patterns which we're looking to negate in order to sit into what we are. Now, you already are what you are. I know that, but the patterns have you convinced that you're not that, that you're not what you are, you see? So then you meet what you're not with I'm not that, and then there you are. It's not a processing or a trying to figure out what you're not. It's just a clear, direct seeing I'm not that, negation. It's very important to see this, I feel, because it is a roadblock or a speed bump that your head's going to hit. There's something's going to arise in your experience. Your head is going to react to that. And it's going to go, you're the one who's aware of that. It's going to happen. And if you get caught in that, then there's an analysis of that, and then the mental's spinning. And you feel like you're the one seeing the spinning. And that's the bondage. The bondage isn't to what's arising, it's to being the owner of what's arising. That's what has you bound. When you feel you own it, you want to work on it. You want to change it. You want to manipulate it. When you see that you're not the doer of it, it comes through crystal clear. It's amazing. And Advaita, or negation, I feel when it's done properly, it does the same thing as really great embodiment or silent illumination or whatever. It ends you up in the body. You're way, way subtle inside your body to the point where it's pervaded by space. And then the whole thing gets super fluid. It's like you're floating, you know? It's crazy. It's like the most beautiful. And that's where the message is it's like they say, like Advaita is not to be learned or understood, it's to be experienced. It's supposed to be like lived, let's say. And this is how it unravels, I feel. But if you're trying to use it to improve self or as a psychotherapeutic thing, you're caught. You're caught in a trap. And it's hard to get out of that trap. So I think it's something that we should really be talking about. Yeah. The other thing, is like if you approach it from the analysis point of view, contents of the experience arise, and then you're the seer, you're super bound to the body. And that you're not getting that pervasive spaciousness inside the body. That's maybe like a cue that the head has got you. Yeah, that you're not negating the seeing, let's say. You've become the seer rather than the seeing itself. Because if there's a lot of analysis of the psychological, you're bound to the body, because the mind interprets to the body of which it's a part. You see? You see you're not the mind and what's seeing the mind, and then there's the pervasiveness of the body, inside the body. And then everything moves through the pervasive space of that. Everything like floats through on its own. And that's when the processing of emotional, mental, whatever, psychological, physical can happen. When you're not entangled with it. Negation will disentangle you, and you'll sit in what remains. But in a psychotherapy movement, you're entangled. You're entangled as the knower, the seer, the hearer, the taster, the toucher. You're entangled as the one who owns all this stuff and is trying to manipulate it. And in that way, you could argue that you're not actually experiencing your individuality. When you disentangle through negation, there's a very intimate connection with your individuality, and at the same time with the pervasiveness, which is completely non-personal. Maybe that is the ultimate paradox from the head, because it seems dual, but it's not dual. To understand individuality, we need to let go of our entanglement with being the individual. Maybe that would be one way of saying it. And then you really touch your individuality, because everything starts to move harmonically, fluidly, like it's supposed to. Yeah, the head is no longer pulling apart your experience into all these pieces. It's been unified by that pervasive space. And that's like when I feel you contact life super deep. When you contact that individuality with that depth, you can let go of life. Oof. And that's all for today, folks.